All right, we're back now. The Mayor of Gloucester, the Honorable Greg Verga. Mr. Mayor, welcome back to MSO.
Thanks, Rick. Glad to be back.
All right, so we're winding down the month of October, and I appreciate the fact that we're able to talk with you basically once a month. A lot to discuss, a lot going on. And I think across the North Shore, the ARPA funding has been a main topic coming out of city halls. So
Yeah.
what's your update? How do you view all this?
Sure. Well, I'll give a quick sort of recap. So the city was awarded $23 million and some change um, before I got here. Nothing really happened with it, which was a good thing for us because we weren't didn't have our hands tied with decisions that were already in place. So we put together a listening group to do a virtual citywide tour to solicit ideas from people. And we had some really good feedback. The turnout was pretty decent, about 200 online suggestions. Some of them were specific, a lot of them were kind of vague. Some of them were totally outside the realm of what's allowable for ARPA. But we took that information, we synthesized it, and started to categorize, put them into different buckets of where they fit. And stuff that obviously meets eligibility is the only stuff we could really look at. We made the first two awards, so to speak. We assigned $10 million to the sewer plant. We've been talking about that. I'll circle back to that in a second. And $3 million to road repair. So the sewer plant we've been talking about for a long time, 40 years, so to speak. The city's been on a waiver for decades. We have a primary treatment, one of only two in the country is what I'm told. And we've had waivers allowing us to discharge what came out of our primary treatment plant. The honeymoon's over. The EPA, DEP are like, no more, you've got to upgrade to a secondary treatment plant. So from day one, I knew that a chunk of ARPA was going to be assigned to that. So it's going over there. There's the potential of a regional approach with our neighbors in Essex, Rockport, Manchester. But regardless, Gloucester has to do something, whether it's alone or with our neighbors. So that 10 million is sort of set aside for that purpose. When I was going door to door and making phone calls during the campaign last year, one of the biggest things that kept popping up was road conditions. And in the end of last fiscal year, because I inherited a budget that was in place July before I got here. So we took $300,000 of free cash, which is money left over after all the calculations are done for the budget from the previous year, plugged it into fiscal year 22's budget. So DPW could do a lot more paving than they typically do. This year rolled around, and when we built the new budget, the line item had been like $60,000 for road repair. Let that sink in, 60,000. We upped it to $350,000. And then on top of that, we plugged in $3 million of ARPA. And we sent out a release about that lists all the streets. It's all on our website. But if people drive around town, they'll see a lot of this underway. Washington Street, School Street, there's some work. This is infrastructure work going on over in Mount Pleasant. And there's a whole list of stuff we're going to try to get to this year, before it gets too cold, and then we'll just pick up in the spring with the rest of it. So that's the first 13 million of the 23 million. The next steps are to look at the other categories. The next step for us will be economic development, things like that. We're not ready to start, giving spoiler alerts at this point. We want to make sure that we have everything in place. We'll eventually circle to a lot of the nonprofits who put in requests. Again, a lot of it was vague. So we'll be reaching back to them. We're not reopening the process, but the people who had taken part in the process, nonprofit organizations, will be asking them for a little more information because federal money, we have to track it, and we don't want Uncle Sam coming back and slapping us on the wrist. And a slap on the wrist means give us the money back. So we want to make sure that whatever we give the money to is A, allowable use, and B, there's a tracking mechanism in place for both them and us.
What's next in this process, Mr. Mayor? More meetings, or you send out release when these decisions are? How's that go?
Yeah, so the committee, the listening post group, they're done. They gave us the report, so we appreciate all the work they did. Carl Guston, Tony Gross, Gretel Seeley. There are several others. So I'm sorry if I'm missing them, but they did a great job. They're all volunteers. So we've got their information. It's all available on the city's website. If you go to arpa.gloucester-ma.gov, you can see it all. So the next steps, yes, that's pretty much what you just said. We'll have releases for each section, as each bucket, as we release the specifics. So stay tuned for the economic development bucket press release, which should be out in the next couple of weeks. I'd like to have everything by the end of the year pretty clear, because we have to have all the money allocated by the end of 2024, and it has to be spent by the end of 2026. My fear, and one of the fears we've been hearing from the Mass Municipal Association, is if there is a changeover in the House of Representatives in Washington, there is the potential that they'll claw back whatever hasn't been allocated and spent, and we lose out on a lot of money.
Well, I know that's happened in the past in the city, but that's a topic for another day, maybe when we talk about history. And I will link to the Gloucester website, in particular the ARPA investment infrastructure link and so on. You sent your office sent a note out that you've received inquiries about not going back to in-person meetings. You know, during the pandemic, obviously, we all are doing what we do now. I think meetings, which I find incredibly convenient. I've not participated in any government meetings, but I don't usually anyway. So what's the deal on that?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, because of the pandemic, we were forced into Zoom. You know, that was, I mean, luckily it was a relatively cheap and effective tool that was out there. So I'm going to hold on a sec because I have to clear my throat.
Sure, me too.
Sorry about that. So cities and towns all over the country, and throughout the world, were able to make that switch quickly. So what we found, it's kind of an obvious result, is participation is way up. It's a lot easier to sit in your living room and turn on your laptop and watch a city council meeting, school committee, planning board meeting, than it is to drive down to City Hall and sit in the audience for potentially 2 to 3 to 4 hours waiting for your item to go up. So participation is way up. It's the numbers are right there on the screen. Anybody who's hosted a Zoom meeting, you can tell who's in attendance. We've had meetings here at City Hall when I was on the city council to vote on a $120 million budget, and the place is completely empty. You know, those days are gone. People are participating. So it's kind of funny. There was a recent letter to the editor saying we have to get back in person. The usual, what are you hiding? But we get the same from the other side. You can't get rid of Zoom because, you know, that's a good way for us to see what's going on. So we've been holding out for the hybrid option. You know, unfortunately for us, we didn't have a location that had the equipment to do so in an effective manner. You know, upstairs in Kairos, the acoustics were designed for a 19th century orator. You know, they weren't designed for sound systems. So we've got a lot of work to do to make for a quality broadcast. So what we have done is for the the non-regulatory boards and commissions, I have sent out a memo saying, if you want to meet in person without Zoom, that's fine. Regulatory boards have got to continue the Zoom process, but we do have the Harbor Master's office, the new facility down on Harbor Loop, that is indeed set up for a hybrid meeting. It's just a smaller space. So like the city council or school committee couldn't depend on holding meetings there because capacity could be, met very quickly. And you have to make sure your room can hold the potential audience. But the city council did vote to go back to their standing committee meetings at the Harbor Master's office. So that's a start. It's a step in the right direction. So they will hold the meetings just like they do now, except they will be live, the whole board, the whole subcommittee. People can come into the Harbor Master's office to participate and to watch, and they can still do it at home. The council Tuesday voted for funding to do some upgrades to phones and data here at City Hall and other city buildings. That is designed in part to bring these facilities here and a few rooms at the Rose Baker Senior Center up to snuff for hybrid meetings. So we're getting there. So I understand the frustration on both sides, that people are saying, what are you hiding? It's a bit offensive that they think we're hiding something. But I'd love to go back in person. The school committee's been meeting in person since 2021 as a group, but the audience hasn't come in the room yet. So we're not hiding anything. The meetings are all recorded and they're all broadcast live, and I don't want to lose that. So we could say, forget Zoom, let's just start meeting in person, but then it just shuts out a whole group of people who've been really enjoying and benefiting from the Zoom aspect.
Yeah, I find it interesting because I was thinking about this the other day. I'm sure there are some people in the city who don't even know how to use Zoom.
Yes.
And they have to be reached. But on the other hand, I think in Gloucester, it's been my experience that if if I want to talk to someone, as a private citizen, as a taxpayer, that person is usually available, whether it's a city councilor, a school committee member, or a mayor. And I think, that speaks well to the availability of city officials.
Right. I don't think there's ever a problem to reach one of the, I think there's 16 of us elected officials, um, via phone or email. But when we can get to the hybrid, the true hybrid, I think that's going to be a wonderful thing. I mean, the legislature was like this close to requiring it in their last budget, and at the last minute they pulled back and just continued what we've been doing. But they could come back in the next few months because the current Zoom mulligan that we're on expires at the end of March. So who knows what they're going to ask for? But that's why we want to be ready.
Okay, let's a couple of other topics here to talk about. Update on the Sawyer Free Library and Gloucester's investment in it.
Yeah, so the city council again on Tuesday voted to bond $29 million. The way I look at it is we're co-signing the loan. It's very similar, much higher numbers, but very similar to what happened with Newell Stadium when the Gloucester Fishermen Athletic Association started that process to refurbish the stadium. They said, we'll raise the money. We're going to pretty much commit to raising the full amount. I forget what the cost was, 3 million, 6 million, whatever the heck it was. But in order to start the process, hiring contractors, et cetera, we need the whole amount bonded by the city to do it. And the stadium, you recall, I think it was $500,000 that New Balance donated to New Balance Field. And then over the course of the next several months and years, they raised the whole amount. So the city was held harmless, and we ended up with a brand new state-of-the-art stadium. So it's a similar concept here. The library has received a $9 million and some change grant from the Mass Library Board, some acronym. It's a state agency, paid out over 5 years, but it's not. They're not going to give any money until they know we have the whole cost covered. Now that we have that via the vote Tuesday, they'll start to distribute that, in 5 installments. They have a number of pledges. You've been reading about it in the Times, from say Gorton's, Institution for Savings, Cape Ann Savings Bank, all the usual players that give big donations, and they're in constant fundraising mode. So I understand fully that the day after they cut the ribbon, it's not going to be paid off. This is going to be a long-term plan. We're probably looking at a 2 to possibly 3-year process for the library to go from closing to reopening. But the repayments are going to take a while. But people, rest assured, it will be paid for by the fundraising activities, and it includes the interest. So we're going to borrow the money. It's going to be repaid over time, but the interest is going to be. So in the end, if we have the state-of-the-art football stadium, we'll have a state-of-the-art library ready for the 21st and 22nd centuries. And
that work has begun, has it not?
They've already begun moving. They're in the old above Mystery Train, at the end of Main Street. And that's going to be their temporary home. It's going to be a little bit crowded, a little bit different than it has been here for the last 50-odd years. But I mean, people have to understand that the Saunders House, which was, I believe, Sam Sawyer donated way back in the day, was the original library when I was a kid. And then in 1976, they opened this new section. That was 1976, almost 50 years ago. And it's just not the best layout for a modern library. So I would urge people to check out the library foundation page, see some of the renderings, what they've got planned. But I think it's going to be a great thing.
Okay, finally, Mr. Mayor, had a decent amount of rain recently. What's the process for determining when the water ban might be lifted in the city?
Right. So the current water ban is through the 31st, which is today, the 28th. So a couple of days from now. The recommendation I'm getting so far from the water department is we can lift the water ban after that date. We aren't back where we were, not in the best spot, but the season for outdoor water use is naturally winding down, and we have had some steady rain. So most likely the water ban will be lifted. Stay tuned. If people aren't on the our rave all-call system, they can go to the city's website and sign up for that. Good place to get updates on emergency info, and then they can hear my voice, every few weeks to give information. But most likely, unless there's like some forecasted drought for the next several weeks, indications are it'll be lifted in the coming days.